They wanted to build an organization that actually was working and fighting to change the neighborhood. It probably saved my life to encounter them. I didn't have no way of knowing that then. Well, if I had a way of knowing it, I didn't know it. Because I still had a lot of craziness in me from the war, from being a veteran, and a lot of frustration about life in the city and my own life that could have easily ended in me doing something foolish with a gun. They gave me a reason to employ the structure and discipline and begin to think of myself as an organizer. The organization made two critical errors in existence. It didn't make the Black Panther era of wanting to be media stars, being in the newspaper, being on television, all that shit. You know, we're going to defend the community against the cops. It didn't make that era. It made the era of one thinking that it's electoral work. I mean, because it was the United Progressives that created the legend of David Richardson, the state representative. They're thinking that their electoral work could be constrained by the organization. You understand? By the organization's principles, by democratic centralist decision making, and that if your candidate was a member of the organization and stuff like that, he wouldn't be overwhelmed by the shit that goes with electoral politics, running for office, becoming a big personality. A lot of people wanting to fuck you. A lot of people want to give you money or be your latter-day friends. And you thinking that the political organization that launched your electoral career, somehow you were bigger than them now. You were more important than them. That was, because that was so the work was so exhausting, even when they succeeded at it, that when David turned away from the organization, people felt betrayed. And some people, couldn't handle that. The other thing was the careerist tendency that eventually split the organization and caused it. You're doing successful community work, really, at least ultimately successful, compared to anything that preceded you. You get control of some institutions in the neighborhood through tremendous risk and, and confrontations with the police and the government and veteran neighborhood organizations and shit like that. You get control of them. You get control of them and you're doing successful work in them. Well, some people turned out to see that as a career path. They didn't want to submit to democratic centralist leadership. They didn't want the organization and telling them what they were to do. They were now directors of organizations and shit like that, and they want the benefits of what the United Progressives made, which was their career opportunities, funding opportunities, support of other people in the neighborhood. But they didn't want the risk. They didn't want to be confronting the cops. They didn't want to be doing the other stuff. They didn't want to stay in the neighborhood. Probably things at the time we could have done differently, but the most important thing was, had we known, had we had some mature advice, I mean, we had access to people who could have, for instance, Tran Van Den, who was a professor at Temple University and was a Vietnamese revolutionary, wanted to sit and talk with us. What's the guy that's on Democracy Now? The Latino he was a leader and a founder of the Young Lords. And he came here to Philadelphia as the Young Lords spiraled into collapse. Wanted to study with us. Because a lot of people were coming out of organizations that were failing and that changing direction and stuff like that. we could have assembled the kind of resources to think this shit through. We didn't have the presence of mind to do that, and had some probably parochial shit going on, you know. We had young people who were in the organization, most of them younger than me, who had dropped out of school, you know, dropped out of school to do revolutionary work, and was then now under some pressure to get on with their lives. You know, their parents done paid for you to go to college and dropped out of college to do this stuff and shit like that. Well, what you gonna do? You know, how you understand how you gonna make a living? How you gonna sustain yourself? What are you gonna do about, you know? So you would have people going back to college, going to law school, and then we had a strata of people getting into drugs, handling their frustrations and, you know, and shit like that by getting into drugs. Then we had a strata of people, good friends of mine, who, as the frustration built up, now we in the middle 70s, late 70s, shit like, getting back into the church, getting into religion, getting into anything that don't require this cloud of what appears to be failure hanging over them. You know, you understand? They're not making no money. They're not able to care for family the way they want to, and they don't see their idea of protracted struggle is like a 90-minute TV show. You know what I mean? The idea of protracted struggle actually means what it did, and when Mao wrote it, that you be doing this shit for the next 20, 30 years. And it might take that long to win. They couldn't see themselves doing that. I was more able to see myself doing that because I didn't really have any meaningful other options. I might have, you know, going off into something else too, if it had been something else as nearly as satisfying and orienting and disciplining for me as political work was. Political work is what gave my life meaning. You know, I didn't have no aspiration to wear a necktie. I didn't have no aspiration to have a house in the suburbs. I didn't have no aspiration to be in the pulpit or be in the mosque or to be, you know, what I wanted was to actually change the world. I didn't have no backup plan. Yes, I wanted to work, but work meant just a job. I've been happy to do construction work. The only reason I didn't stay in the union to do construction work is because around the same time that I got active in radical organizing, there was a, recession, depression or something here in commercial construction, and there wasn't no work. And I let my damn union card lapse. Guys were taking turns working a day of the week so they could keep their unemployment accounts open and they could keep growing and shit like that. That's how bad it got, between 70 and 72, something like that. So I didn't have any other alternative future that I could see. All kinds of stuff that now we take for granted was just open. Like I said, at that time, Philadelphia had one council person. So the idea that you could run for public office and stuff like that, and that there was a black voter base and an interest in it, that came out of the civil rights movement, and that moved north. And Philadelphia was a place where it took root. Within a few years, we had several council people. We had several state legislators, Were they progressive? Not particularly. But at that time, the fact that they were black and answered to a black voter base was seen as almost miraculous. And the idea that they were entitled to a grassroots support and grassroots organization, the United Progressives pioneered in that. United Progressives helped create the Northwest Action Committee, which was a device that harnessed the enthusiasm of hundreds, maybe even thousands, certainly hundreds of people with jobs who volunteered to work the electoral campaigns that the progressives endorsed and supported. They weren't part of the core membership, but they were, like for instance, you would put out a call for people to work the polls on election day, where you'd have more people turn up than you had work for. You would have turn up to do it because it was right, not expecting to get paid. Now we don't even ask people to pretend to do it for free. They come to do it because they saw it as their participation in the civil rights work. These were the parents of the kids who, for instance, knew about the work because of the Brickyard Youth Council, shit like that. These were the co-workers and family members of just people in the neighborhood who saw themselves as activists. I mean, in some cases, people with jobs that I didn't know that black people could get. One guy, I can't remember it, he was like a senior chemist for DuPont or one of them like that. And I mean, he's making more than $100,000 then, you know. Like, but these people would take off, maybe even sometimes a week at a time, use their vacation up time to do campaign work, to get our candidates across the line. But if we had been reading our dialectical materialism in light of our own experience, we should have known that that shit was going to pass. You understand that you're going to go from a period of high activity to a period of low activity. There's going to be different transitions and stuff like that. And the organizations got to survive that. I mean, that's one of the basic things that Mao Zedong teaches. You know, the organization got to survive that and prepare for that eventuality. That there are going to be agents in your ranks. There are going to be people who don't want you to succeed, but that are there and grinning in your face and sometimes even doing the work, but don't want you to succeed. Those are things that we did not learn fully and we did not address effectively. And you combine them with just general exhaustion, and you had basically the collapse of the organization. First, we had a coup where and Melvin were driven out. And then when people saw the leadership betrayed, a lot of people took that as a sign that, well, let me get on with the rest of my life now. I think that if we had stayed together and expanded our constituency citywide, which we had the potential to do, because a lot of people saw the work as impressed by the work, did not understand that there was an organization behind it. Some didn't want to understand that there was an organization behind it. A lot of people did not understand that the organization was a regional power, that we were watched and admired from the East Coast to the Midwest, and even had some people on the West Coast that knew about our work. Because we were succeeding where other organizations weren't. Discipline, leadership, and the model for what we were trying to do that we drew from Jimmy. Mm-hmm. What we were trying to do was timely and was actually possible. And this could see in little bits and in a few large bits, so that where other organizations had already begun to tear themselves apart, we were still working successfully. Not successfully from the standpoint of long-term, protracted viability, I think now, I don't know what I thought then, but successfully in terms of the circumstances nationwide at that time. Well, one, you gotta create organizations that sustain you, and that you sustain. I mean, we did stuff like help people get mortgages. We did something like make people report on their successful job search. Are you going your ass to work every day? Are you saving some money? You know, you had some children before you came in the organization. Are you taking care of them? All those little questions. Basically, are you living a principled life? You know, are you getting high? What are you going to do about that? Having to answer those questions to the collective, discipline the organization, as well as having some work to do that justified submitting to that. Some work that you saw as worth doing, you know, being successful in small ways. What's missing now is a rationale for radical political work other than getting people elected to office. With the collapse of the Communist Party, there's no meaningful, radical left party. Even though the last probably 30 years of his life, the Communist Party wasn't shit either. But it survived because there was a period of dynamic organization and recruitment in the 20s and 30s that helped people survive the Depression, that helped people realize the goals of the New Deal, that helped sustain the trade unions when the bosses were trying to drive them into extinction. So the Communist Party had that heritage. Right now, we don't have anything comparable to that. What the Communist Party never had that I'm aware of, and this don't have to be true at all, just because I know so little about the internal workings of the Communist Party USA, was a vision for an American revolution. In this period, if we're going to build a revolutionary organization, how can we build an organization that don't exist online? How are we going to build an organization where people know each other and people know that, you know, Butch got bad breath, but if you sit across the room, you can talk to him, you know, that kind of shit. Where people get to know each other and trust each other over the long run. And where people have a vision of what governing means. I mean, there's a Muslim scholar that be on YouTube. I can't think of his name, Holden or something. I can't think of his name. I mean, he's a gifted analyst of life in America. He's not a Marxist, but he's a historian, and he predicts that the United States as a state is going to collapse over the next 25 or 30 years. And there's reason for thinking it. Make a lot of practical sense. But what he don't project an analysis of is, can the American ruling class be overthrown? Because the American ruling class right now don't need the United States to survive as a state. They just need it to survive as a capital producing entity. I mean, they need where their investments are to survive. So if you end up with regional militias and regional governments and, you know, and conflicts, they want to be able to keep making money. Well, if we're going to build a revolutionary organization that is national in scope and its objectives, we have to build an organization whose memberships, its cells, its projects survive regionally and survive locally and communicate nationally and win an occasional victory so that there's a pool of people to draw on, so that they have a constituency. If y'all paying any attention to this New York mayor race and this guy Mandan and the people who've come out the woodwork to make him mayor of New York. Well, that is no small success. Now, I mean, he's young, so he's going to be absorb some good ass whoopings from Capitol. You know, with that shit-eating grin of his, he's going to be, you know, he's got some problems to solve. But he has found a base. He's found a constituency. Now, in that constituency, is there a core organization that will sustain itself and sustain that constituency no matter what happens to Mandami? That has a class project independent of him being a mayor. It may complement it, it may support it, but it has to survive and serve its base constituency irregardless of what happens to him. If he don't have that, then eventually they'll be overthrown. There's got to be a core of people who care about this over the long term and have long-term objectives. It's a strange idea depending on where you're looking. One, it worked because people needed community, and they still need community. Even in the American imperial system that pushes the rugged individual, people need community. They need somebody that's trustworthy, somebody to call when they're in trouble. The poorer you are, the more you need it. Somebody when you don't have groceries. Somebody when your children are being disobedient and disrespectful and they need somebody to talk to. Something to do with their time that is meaningful. Some people find that in church, in the mosque. We happen to come together at a time when it's possible to find that doing political work. I don't know if we could pull it off today. I'd like to think we could. But we came together in the wake of Robert Williams, you know, in the wake of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, in the wake of the rise of the Panthers, the rise of the Black Liberation Army, and even in the wake of the Weather Underground. You know, the Weather Underground, the Red Brigades of Italy, you know, the IRA. I mean, there was shit going on all over the world to make it appear rational, sensible to do what we were doing. Especially if you come from a background of your own that where there was moral underpinnings to what you were taught being a grown-up meant. If you were like me and your grandfather read the Bible to you and made you show him you could read it, the idea that shit ought to be explained, that what you did with your life to make the world better could be explained biblically, you know, made those decisions make a lot more sense to me and to others. I mean, as recently as 10 years ago, I remember one of the old comrades and life has taken a different turn. But what he does talk about is he missed when he had a higher calling, when he was in the United Progressive. You know, when being in the United Progressive meant something, meant having a higher calling, meant people respected you, meant that you were supposed to be doing something to make the neighborhood better. You know, I don't know if an organization emerging now can or should try to reproduce that. But it needs to have some practical glue that anchors its existence to its practice, to what the problems it's trying to do. Have I done that? The only thing that I can contribute to that is Chairman Mao said, study. Study with determination. Don't act like you know it all. And I have studied for the last 50 some years. I've always been fairly insightful, not necessarily as consistent as I should have been, but when I didn't have any work to do, I was studying. I've always wanted to understand the world I live in better. Not always successfully, not always usefully. I've made a bunch of mistakes in my life. I've always been poor, which has made things more difficult and more complicated. I've always had complicated relationships with women, which has made things more difficult. I've always been a minority view. In other words, even when I, with my friends and doing shit we've agreed upon, if something didn't sound right to me, I had something to say. I've been a pain in the ass, raising the critical question, which a lot of times has left me sitting on the sideline when people doing shit that they thought was important. Sometimes even when I thought it was important. But even today, at this age, I'm trying to continually ask myself the critical questions about shit going on in the world. And shit going on in my community and in my family and with my children. And hoping that I can have some insight to share with them to make them think through shit they got